things I've ever done. The Paris Olympics truly are pushing the envelope in terms of technology and how it's being deployed.
We've got blood, we've got sweat. If I was doing this, we'd definitely have the tears as well.
It's really important for journalists to bring their own experience to the stories that they cover. But just because I'm a disabled person doesn't mean that I should only ever cover stories to do with disability. And that's a very fine line to tread, but hopefully I'm getting it right.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The leaders of the United States and Britain have ended talks at the White House with no public change to their policy of blocking Ukraine's use of long-range Western missiles against Russia. A former chief executive of the US chain Abercrombie & Fitch faces further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events he hosted around the world. And with London Fashion Week well underway, we speak to some of the Ukrainian designers showcasing their work on the catwalk this year. Hello and welcome, I'm Martine Croxall. Sir Keir Starmer says talks with President Biden in Washington have been wide-ranging and productive, but wouldn't say whether he'd persuaded the US to allow Ukraine to fire long-range missiles into Russia. President Zelensky has repeatedly called for permission to use the weapons on targets across the border. He claims it's the only way to end the war. Our political editor Chris Mason has sent this report from the White House.
I think the next few weeks and months could be crucial.
What does President Biden make of Russia's threats against the West?
I don't think much about Vladimir Putin.
This is the Blue Room of the White House. The President, the Prime Minister and their team spoke here for about an hour and a half. The war in Ukraine dominated the conversation. Afterwards, Sir Keir Starmer wouldn't be drawn on whether he'd persuaded the President that authorising Ukraine to fire Western missiles at Russia was a good idea. Instead, he said,
well, there's only one reason we're having these discussions, and that is because Putin has illegally invaded Ukraine. The quickest way to resolve this, obviously, lies through what Putin actually does, because it's for him to end this. But we are having the discussion. We've stood with Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to self-defence. And we've stood united, not just with our allies here in the US, but across with our NATO allies. That's very, very important to us.
These are the long-range Anglo-French missiles Ukraine would love to fire into Russia. The UK making the argument to allies it's a request that should be granted. They rely on American satellite systems to work. You might ask why the Prime Minister has been so keen to dash here to visit a president who we know will be gone in just a few months' time. His answer is there are urgent issues that need addressing now, not least this question of missiles. The President has been sceptical about Ukraine being able to fire them into Russia, fearing it would be dangerous. This is the reality of the war grinding on in Ukraine, a country desperate for ongoing help, its allies weighing up how best to do it, and at what cost. Chris Mason, BBC News, in Washington.
Our North America correspondent Jenny Kumar has the latest from Washington.
We haven't had a huge amount of detail in terms of what was actually discussed, but there was a short statement that was issued, and that said that the Allies reaffirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine. They also expressed deep concern about Iran and North Korea's provision of lethal weapons to Russia and China's support of Russia's defence industrial base. Now, as we saw in Chris's report, Sir Keir Starmer gave a short interview after that meeting, and he refused to be drawn on whether a decision had been made to lift those restrictions on enabling Western missiles to strike deep into Russia. And he insisted that the discussion was wide-ranging, was about strategy and not about a specific capability. But for the Western allies, it's a delicate balance between deciding the impact of inaction versus action, and also what Russia's response would be to that.
Jenny Kumar. More now from our correspondent in Kiev, James Waterhouse, who has more on how this has been received in Ukraine.
You can be sure there will be disappointment, continued disappointment, because as far as President Zelensky is concerned, this is a continued pattern for Ukraine. It asks the West for a certain level of support. The West says no over fears of a Russian escalation. Ukraine's position worsens in the war, and then the West finally says yes. The question over how Western missiles is used is merely an extension of that. Now, it seems, after all of these sort of hopes and reports that there would be the green light from Washington, it seems Washington is worried about its own stockpile of weapons, of missiles, these ATACMS missiles, and they also don't believe they will make much of a difference. And despite the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer saying they want to lead the way and give such permissions, it's the US which gives that kind of political cover for other allies to follow suit. So it is disappointing for Ukraine because it wants to use these missiles on Russian air bases where, as far as they're concerned, Russian bombers take off unchallenged and repeatedly strike Ukrainian cities. So I think we're going to see an extension of political disappointment, if you like.
James Waterhouse in Kiev. Let's speak to Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO, as well as a former US special representative for Ukraine. Kurt Volker, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. To what extent is Ukraine's frustration justified?
Well, I think it is incredibly justified because they are fighting a war for survival, and Russia is attacking them from bases across Russia. And essentially, we're telling Ukrainians, don't hit back. They should have sanctuary inside Russia. That's an unacceptable position overall, and I think that is justified. And now, what may happen here is some of this may get loosened up behind the scenes. You may see the U.S. not object to the UK allowing the Storm Shadows to go. You may see some shift in U.S. position, but just not announced as some sort of new policy. But the Ukrainian frustration is palpable, and I think it is justified.
But we've still got the concern of the United States and the UK, we're told, that to allow the use of these weapons in this way to target spots inside Russia would lead to an escalation. How likely is that escalation?
Yeah, I think that is a narrative that Russia has pushed and pushed in order to influence Western behavior. If Putin were able to escalate today, he would. He's not holding back because we're not doing something. He's actually trying to destroy Ukraine and take over the country, and he's not able to. I don't think that he is willfully holding back and doing only half measures. He's trying to win this war, and we need to recognize that. The second is Russia is not a victim here. No one should be concerned about Ukraine defending itself by striking back inside Russia. We seem to have distorted the perceptions here that it's somehow not fair for Ukraine to hit Russia. It really makes no sense.
To what extent, though, is it too late? That we're told that Russia will have moved some of these potential targets so that they're out of reach, even for these long-range missiles?
Well, there are a lot of targets that can't be moved. We're talking about air bases, airfields, fuel depots, distribution lines, logistical supply lines. These are things that are fixed. And according to the Institute for the Study of War, which has looked at particular targets, there's well over 200 that can't be moved. In addition to that, forcing Russia to actually move things, to get away from where the potential strikes would be a benefit to Ukraine. It would make it more difficult, less predictable for how Russia could conduct its attacks. So that is itself a virtue.
Short of currently granting the permission that Zelensky is seeking, how else can the West best bolster Ukraine's military?
Well, the number one thing that has been discussed here in Kyiv this weekend is air defense. Air defense is the principal thing affecting the economy, the energy grid, the local population, transportation. Everything is impacted by air defense. And what we need to do is increase our capacities to assist Ukraine with air defense. One of the things that I think should be done, and done as soon as possible, is for the bordering states, Poland and Romania in particular, to ask Ukraine if they can extend their own air defense coverage into Ukrainian airspace in order to protect NATO territory and populations. Just this week, we saw Russia strike a ship inside Romanian economic waters. It's the exclusive economic zone of Romania. That is an unacceptable escalation by Russia of attacks inside NATO territory. We've already had examples of missiles and drones flying through Polish and Romanian airspace, and 2 Poles were killed last year from falling debris. So it is well within reason for NATO to say we need to take out these things if they are close to our borders. And I'm sure Ukraine would welcome that.
Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Since President Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 2 years ago, there's been a crackdown in Russia on anyone expressing anti-war views. It's revived grim memories of the Soviet past, when denouncing colleagues and neighbours was widespread. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, reports.
Nadezhda Buyanova is a doctor, but you'll find her in court, not the clinic. The 68-year-old paediatrician faces 10 years in prison, accused of spreading fake news about the Russian army. Nadezhda tells me, I read about this kind of thing happening to others. I never imagined it would happen to me. The story began at this Moscow medical center. A patient's mother claimed that the doctor had told her Russian soldiers in Ukraine are legitimate targets. The woman recorded an angry video. Her ex-husband had been killed fighting in Ukraine. Then she wrote this denunciation of the doctor to police. It was enough to put her on trial. 400 miles away. Different trial, same charges. Near St. Petersburg, hairdresser Anna Alexandrova had fallen out with her neighbour Irina over a plot of land in their village. Their family feud led to Anna being reported and accused of posting messages critical of the war in Ukraine. She faces up to 15 years in prison. Any regrets from the other side? I feel sorry for her, says Irina's mother, Natalia. I don't want her to get a long sentence. I want her to receive a just punishment, says Irina. Across the country, there are reports of Russians informing on Russians. One thing Russia's war in Ukraine has done here is turbocharge the hunt for internal enemies, for alleged traitors. And it's in this atmosphere of us against them that you get neighbour snitching on neighbour, students informing on their teachers, professors on students, and even parishioners denouncing priests.
One thing Stalin did not give them, their freedom.
Sounds familiar. Under Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, denunciation was actively encouraged. The prison camps, the Gulag, were full of victims who'd been snitched on by their fellow citizens.
What I find really remarkable is how quickly Russian genetic memory has come back. How things that people who didn't live in those times suddenly act as if they did. Suddenly they are squealing on others. Yes, it is a Soviet practice, but it's also something about the Russian genetic code of fear, of trying to protect themselves at the expense of others.
And in this atmosphere, look what's happening. Some Russians are taking the law into their own hands. On a Moscow bus, two men attack 87-year-old Dmitry Grinchy. They say they overheard him insulting Russian mercenaries fighting in Ukraine.
He lunged at me, flashing his eyes and gnashing his teeth, as if he wanted to bite me. He called over his son, a big guy, who pressed his finger into my arm to hurt me. I've got bruises here and here.
The two men forced Dmitry off the bus and dragged him to the police. He wasn't charged, but the incident has left Dmitry shaken and angry.
The Russian constitution says that everyone has the right to free speech. Why should others get to say what they think and not me?
Under Stalin, Dmitry's father was arrested and executed, an innocent man. Russia's past is a painful one, but it's the present that worries Dmitry, with Russia once again searching for enemies and agents and heading in a dangerous direction. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
In the US, the fallout of Tuesday's presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is still being unpicked. But when will we know how and if it affected voters' opinions? Anthony Salvanto is polling director at our US news partners, CBS.
If any, I think it'll be next week, towards the end of next week, and I'll tell you why. First is contextually, if you look at post-debate, immediate post-debate polls from 2016, from 2020, past years, you've mentioned there have been times when you saw winners or perceived winners of debates, including the fact that in 2016, a lot of people thought that Hillary Clinton was winning some of those debates. And ultimately, that didn't pan out when Election Day rolled around. So those polls have some value, but it's limited, number one. And number two, you have to remember that the audience for those debates is large, but it's often disproportionately older. And so as younger people, and we know they're getting their information from a lot of different sources, that's going to trickle out over days. They're going to be getting information from the internet, from family and friends, et cetera. So that takes a while to process. And that's why I think you want to see that measurement in a few days. But finally, let me say this. There isn't a lot of room to move in this electorate. In our polling, the numbers of people that we think are persuadable by even the most generous measure is less than 1 in 10, and it may be smaller than that. So the question is, how many of those people are really watching to be moved in one direction or another? And frankly, that number is fairly small. We'll see, but that's the context.
Anthony Salvanto over CBS. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has weighed in on the US election. Speaking to journalists on a flight from Singapore to Indonesia, the Pope said Trump's stance on immigration and Harris's views on abortion leave voters with a choice between the lesser of two evils.
Both are against life, whether it is the one who is chasing away migrants or the one that kills children. Both are against life. I cannot decide. I cannot say. I am not an American and I will not be voting there. Expelling migrants, not giving them the possibility of working, not welcoming migrants is a sin. It is grave.
The funeral for Ugandan Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei, who was killed by a former boyfriend earlier this month, has begun this morning in eastern Uganda. The service is taking place at her family's hometown of Bukwo. She will receive full military honours, having been a member of the Ugandan Armed Forces. The 33-year-old marathon runner, who competed in the Paris Games this year, died after being doused with petrol and set alight. Her body was brought overnight from Kenya, where she lived and trained. Her death has renewed concern about the level of violence against women in Kenya. Her former partner has since died of his injuries. Patience Okumu is a Ugandan lawyer who's campaigned on gender equality issues, and she joins us now. Patience, thank you very much for joining us. What needs to be learned from Rebecca's violent death?
Thank you for having me. I think that in this moment of deep sorrow, mourning, we need to reflect about the ways in which women, no matter their social status, no matter what they've achieved in life, are still expected to bow to the expectations of society, even if it kills them. Domestic violence is still a reality for many women in Africa, in Eastern Africa. The statistics tell us that at least 42% of women suffer some kind of violence in their lifetime. But this is perhaps an understatement, because as an African woman, every day on the road, in school, you're sexualized, you're hustled. There are laws. There is systematic discrimination against women, systematic control of women's bodies, where there are laws that have been passed in public places forbidding women to appear a certain way, for instance, in Uganda. In Kenya, there are laws to protect the so-called family. There are laws that are reminding women that if they go astray, they will be put into their place and they will perish. And Rebecca's death reminds us that these society expectations, these stereotypes are still very real, they're still dangerous, and many women are suffering in silence, they're suffering in toxic relationships and paying with their lives.
Just briefly, Patience, then, what needs to change? If laws are in place, how much does this come down to educating boys and men? Just briefly.
It comes down to just looking inwardly and asking ourselves, what are we telling boys? How are we raising children who are in our hands, the boys? How are we raising girls? Are we preparing them to be willing victims? Are we raising boys who are seeing women as their equal, who do not feel the need to dominate, to conquer to the point of killing in order to feel like they are men enough? We need to challenge the definition of an African man to make it more inclusive, more empowering, more open to different expressions, different relationships, and to let men realize that women have achieved. They have survived violence, female genital mutilation, the basics, and they've grown, and there's been work done, and they should be able and ready to exist with the empowered woman and not seek to dominate her.
Patience Akumu, thank you very much for talking to us here on BBC News.
Thank you.
During the COVID lockdown, it became more common to order food shopping online, and the trend has continued, whether it's for convenience, health reasons, or because of transport issues. Yet it seems the supermarkets are keeping the costs higher for online shoppers, making own brand items unavailable and charging them more than those who head in store. Our reporter Simon Spark has more.
Totally disappeared.
Lee is a loyal Asda shopper. He pays for their annual delivery pass so he can order his shop online and get it to his door, something he needs to do for his family.
I'm a full-time carer, look after my wife and the son, so it's very difficult to us to get out.
But recently he's been forced to pay more.
The baked beans, normally about 27p a tin for the essentials, totally disappeared. Next one is 42p or Heinz.
These are the items Lee couldn't get online. Lee's list includes apple sauce, in-store price 72p, cheapest online £1.70. Baked beans, in-store 27, online 42. Baked beans and sausages, in-store 50p, online 56. Instant coffee, in-store 99p, online £2.25. Garden peas, in-store 28p, online 55. New potatoes, 38p in-store, online 75. So what should have cost £3.14 in store actually costs £6.23 online. Multiply that out by everything you can see in this picture and that's a difference of over £29.
It's affecting a lot of families, and other people out there with low incomes are forced to pay them bigger prices and they just can't afford it.
But it seems Asda are not the only supermarket being selective with what goes on their website. We've found that Morrison's Savour range has also gone missing. So we've brought Lee's list. And again, it was a similar story, with all Savour ranges in store, but not on the website. This time on 5 items, what should have cost £2.50 in store would cost customers £5.69 online, more than double. We also checked Lee's list against Tesco's and Sainsbury's, but they did list their budget range online. In response, Asda says they have one of the largest value ranges on the market. And like any retailer, we regularly review and adjust that range to reflect customer shopping habits. As a result, we removed some Just Essentials products from Asda.com earlier this year. And Morrison's told us they offer online customers great value through our Aldi and Lidl price match and more card offers. Our minimum online order is also one of the lowest in the market at £25.
Normally a shopping budget is about £50 a week, but that's gone up to 70, 80 now. It's completely unfair.
Simon Spark, BBC News.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been holding a huge rally in Indian-administered Kashmir ahead of key assembly elections. His visit to Doda is the first by an Indian Prime Minister in more than 4 decades. He told crowds his BJP government would grant full statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. The elections are the first in the territory since the removal of its special administrative status a decade ago. Security operations have intensified in the disputed region in recent days, amid a rise in clashes between rebels and security forces. A former chief executive of the US fashion chain Abercrombie & Fitch is facing further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events that he hosted around the world. Mike Jeffries and his British partner Matthew Smith are already defending a civil lawsuit which alleges they ran a sex trafficking operation. 20 men have now told the BBC they attended or helped organise sex events for Mr Jeffries between 2009 and 2015. The FBI is also investigating. A lawyer for Mr Jeffries has previously said his client denied wrongdoing. Mr Smith has never responded to requests for comment. Reminder of our top story this hour and the British Prime Minister's talks with Joe Biden in Washington having come to an end. Sir Keir Starmer said talks had been wide-ranging and productive, but didn't signal any decision on allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles to hit targets inside Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly called on Kiev's Western allies to authorise their use, with President Putin warning that such a decision would represent NATO's direct participation in the Ukraine war. Stay with us on BBC News.
Hello. Today certainly dawned on quite a chilly note across some southern areas. We had temperatures down in the low to mid single figures, but gradually through the course of the weekend, we're going to be seeing those temperatures on the rise. So it'll turn a little bit warmer. Still some rain across some northern areas, particularly so for Northern Ireland and Scotland today. Down to the fact that we've got low pressure sitting out towards the northwest. That'll push this cold front gradually further east, but high pressure holds on further south. So plenty of dry, sunny weather for central and southern England, much of Wales too. That cloud that we had this morning tending to break up into the afternoon. Eastern Scotland holding on to some dry weather into the afternoon, but this band of rain will arrive across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. The winds are going to pick up here too. And we're going to see temperatures generally the mid to high teens in the north, could be 19, 20 degrees down towards the south and east. Into the evening hours then, still dry towards the south. We've got this band of cloud and patchy light rain clearing out of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but that's going to be slow moving across Northern England and North Wales to start the day. Most of us reasonably mild, still a little bit chilly overnight in the south. We're getting down into single figures again, but not quite as cold as it's been over the past few nights here. So Sunday's weather then, band of cloud and slow moving on and off patchy rain across Northern England, North Wales at times too. Either side of that, things are looking drier and brighter. There'll be a rash of showers just drifting gradually eastwards across Scotland, but they should clear away fairly quickly. So an improved day compared to today, more sunshine here. And in the sunshine down towards East Anglia and the southeast, 20 or 21 degrees. But for most of us, I think we'll be in the high teens. Now heading on into the new working week, and high pressure very much going to be dominating our weather right across the British Isles. So Monday, not much weather on the map, as you can see. We will have a little bit of mist, cloud and low fog here and there, but that should gradually lift and clear away. So some long spells of blue sky, lighter winds than there has been as well. So it's going to feel really pleasant. 20, 21 degrees in the south. Further north, we're still looking at the mid to high teens on Monday, but those temperatures will increase into the middle of the week as weather fronts are kept at bay, and we're going to be seeing the winds increasingly coming in from an easterly direction, bringing us these orange colours. You can see this milder air mass, especially for central and southern areas. So looking ahead then, we're going to see temperatures in the south up to possibly the mid-20s through the middle part of the week. Typically the high teens, low 20s further north. But for all of us, a largely dry, settled spell of weather with some sunshine on the cards. Bye for now.
I became a tech journalist because I wanted to tell stories about technology. That sounds obvious, but as a disabled person, your life is filled with all sorts of assistive tech. My first ever proper TV presenting gig was about prosthetic running blades.
Even with all the training in the world, I don't think I'm ever going to be fit enough to compete with these guys.
Assistive tech in the last 20 years has absolutely transformed from something that was very basic to science fiction. It's completely mind-blowing.
This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done.
The Paris Olympics truly are pushing the envelope in terms of technology and how it's being deployed.
We've got blood, we've got sweat. If I was doing this, we'd definitely have the tears as well.
It's really important for journalists to bring their own experience to the stories that they cover. But just because I'm a disabled person doesn't mean that I should only ever cover stories to do with disability. And that's a very fine line to tread, but hopefully I'm getting it right.
You get scared?
No, I don't get scared. I've covered many wars over many years.
It bothers me to think about North Korean surveillance. Anything left on a shred of paper or my laptop, could it put somebody else's life at risk?
It was always going to be a history-making election.
This is not the time to stumble over my words. My job is to expose how people are targeted because I'm a reporter who can do that.
Behind the Stories. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This is BBC News, the headlines. The leaders of the United States and Britain speak of the importance of Ukraine winning its war with Russia during talks at the White House. But President Biden and Sir Keir Starmer give no sign of changing their policy not to allow Kyiv to fire Western long-range missiles into Russia. The former chief executive of the US fashion chain Abercrombie & Fitch faces further allegations of sexually exploiting men at events that he hosted around the world. The funeral for Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei begins in Uganda. She was killed after being set on fire by a former boyfriend. There are calls to name a road and sports venue after her. The Liberal Democrat Party conference begins here in the UK. It's the first time party members have come together since winning 72 parliamentary seats in July's election. We'll be live in Brighton. Hello, welcome. I'm Martine Croxall. So, party conference season's kicking off with the Liberal Democrats first up at their conference in Brighton. It's the first time they've come together since winning 72 Westminster seats in July's election, a record for the party. They want to use their parliamentary presence to call for urgent measures to tackle the NHS crisis and improve social care. Our political correspondent Hannah Miller reports.
The Lib Dems are arriving in Brighton in a mood that matches the weather. After celebrating their best ever general election results, the party's the third biggest in Parliament, and some of its members are here as MPs for the first time.
The mood is so upbeat, it is so buoyant, but we're really determined to get stuff done. So the reason why we fight elections, why we win elections, is so that we can achieve things for our community. So I'm excited to be talking about our plan for fixing social care and the health service and how we really represent our communities, be that strong, determined opposition to the government and represent our communities the best possible way we can.
The Liberal Democrats achieved record election results by pitching themselves in opposition to the Conservatives, raising the question of what to do now that Labour are in government. The party says it wants to offer a constructive opposition, challenging ministers on policies they don't like, such as the recent cut in the winter fuel allowance. And they want to use this platform to put forward their own ideas too, with a focus today on health and social care.
Fixing social care is going to be critical to helping the NHS. We have to help the NHS, but we also have to get social care back on its feet so we can get people out of hospital, back to work, get the economy growing again. And that was a bit of the elephant in the room on Thursday when Wes Streeting was making a statement, because it can't be done without fixing social care.
And among the policies, could there be another stunt like those Ed Davies become famous for? This is, after all, a party that's proved it knows how to have a good time. Hannah Miller, BBC News, Brighton.
And Hannah joins us now from the conference in Brighton. Hannah, good morning.
Morning, Martine. Yes, I'm joined by Vince Cable, the Liberal Democrats' former leader and business secretary from 2010 to 2015, and Aubrey Allegretti from The Times as well. Morning to both of you. Vince, we've run through the stats and statistics about how successful the party was at the general election. How does it feel to you, as someone who's been involved with the party for such a long time, to be here at such a high watermark?
Well, there's a real buzz around the place, and I think that's justified. I mean, I've been through the highs and the lows, and I was leader in one of the difficult passages after we'd lost a couple of difficult elections. I was also there when we were at our previous peak. And I think we're back there. We're being taken seriously. The leader is listened to in the media in the House of Commons, and that's an important step forward. And now we've got to buckle down to being an effective, constructive opposition party, which is what we are.
To some extent, is this better than being in coalition, in the sense that you can kind of say what you think without having to take the responsibility in the same way?
Well, being in government was hard, and the coalition was particularly hard, but it was important. And I think one of the key things about the Lib Dems, we're not just a populist opposition party. We've been in government nationally and local government, run councils up and down the country, and shown competence and know how to make difficult choices. And I think that's a very important place to start from.
And Aubrey, what are you going to be looking for over the course of this weekend and the next few days?
Well, three things. I mean, first of all, obviously a classic Lib Dem stunt. David will be arriving here in typical bombastic fashion. And I'm told that in his speech they were preparing to announce, or for him to go through some of the stunts that didn't quite make the finished result, that were scrapped to the end for being too zany.
Oh, great, we can't wait to hear that.
Exactly, yes. I'm sure he'll make a splash, as it were. Second of all, obviously policy-wise, the Liberal Democrats have to ask themselves about how they can really stand out and cut through in a sort of era of huge Labour majority. And so what makes them a distinctive enough voice? Ed Davey's obviously been very vocal and personable on the subject of social care, and it's fertile ground for the Liberal Democrats because, of course, Labour soon after coming into office announced that as part of their package of cuts, they would be scrapping the social care cap that was going to come into effect next year. So what the Lib Dems are going to be pressuring the government to do on social care is really interesting. And then nationally and politically, as Vince said, how they grow from here. Is 72 a high watermark, or is it somewhere that they can use as a springboard to get bigger? We're obviously here in a sort of bustling city of Brighton, but they really want to appeal to those rural voters that they won for the first time in lots of seats in 2024. So how they expand from here, I think, will be really interesting in the message they sent.
Let's just pick up on a couple of those things with you, Vince. On health and social care, first of all, you were in government when the Lansley reforms were introduced, described this week as a calamity without international precedent. Do you regret that they went through in the way that they did?
Yeah, they were a bit of a disaster, but the problem was at the beginning of the government, we were given exactly the same messages that this government's been given, that the NHS was unsustainable, it was in a state of crisis, radical reform was needed. In fact, the last thing the NHS needed was a reorganisation. And it wasted a lot of time and money, and crucial policy issues were not addressed. So we've been there. But, the NHS problems are very deep. I think we all know in broad strategic terms what has to be done, to shift to preventive medicine, to community medicine, this kind of thing. But getting it to happen is difficult. The Blair government tried and found it difficult. The coalition did in more financially straitened times. But it's a big challenge. And I think the Lib Dems are right to focus on social care, because there's no point improving hospitals if you can't get people back into the community when they're recovering.
And the party is claiming to be the party of health and social care, saying that you can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. Are there actually, though, concrete policies that the Liberal Democrats think would adequately fund social care and actually make it better, rather than just saying, oh, we all need to talk about this?
Well, money is a big issue. There's obviously an issue of priorities. I mean, the whole point about the Dilnot report, which we approved in coalition and was never implemented, was it was a form of social insurance that the government was underpinning, and that's something that can be done without a great deal of cash. But, social care isn't the only issue the Lib Dems will be distinctive about. I mean, we made a big splash, literally and figuratively, around pollution and the sewage in the system, and that's another thing we'll be focusing on. Europe, the Lib Dems were long the party of Europe and remain so. We're debating that this afternoon.
Aubrey, on social care, is there an issue here that kind of all the parties agree that something needs to be done, but it's such a knotty, challenging issue, there's not a huge amount to see between them?
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see the sort of level of cross-party coordination this Parliament. It is one of those issues that's viewed as so totemic that it kind of requires buy-in from all the political parties so that none of them end up sticking their heads above the parapet, as Theresa May sort of tried to do in 2017 and rightly or wrongly was shot down for it. So there are questions about how much the parties will be able to work together to come up with a cross-party solution that they know none of them will at the end criticise come the general election.
And Vince, I just want to ask you very briefly before we go, do you think this is a high watermark for the Lib Dems, or can you go further?
No, not at all. I mean, clearly the party has to consolidate the seats that we've got, which are mostly in former Conservative areas, but in the past we've shown we can break through initially in local government in the big cities of the north, and I think when people become disillusioned with the Labour government, we're already seeing it, in many places they'll turn to the Lib Dems, and I would look forward in a couple of years to be going back to running places like Sheffield and Newcastle that we used to do in the past.
Thank you very much to both of you for joining us this morning. We'll let you go and enjoy the sunny Brighton sunshine. Lots of people here waiting, as Aubrey mentioned, for Ed Davey's arrival in quite spectacular fashion we are expecting when he comes, as we've become used to during the general election campaign.
I wonder what he's come up with this time. Hannah, thank you very much. Hannah Miller in Brighton. An 18-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after 3 people died in a tower block in Luton. All 3 people were pronounced dead at the scene. Vincent McAviney reports.
Police were called to this 15-storey tower block in Luton at 5:30 on Friday morning after concerns for the welfare of someone in one of the flats. When they arrived, police found 3 people with serious injuries who were then pronounced dead at the scene. An 18-year-old man was arrested near the flats and a weapon was recovered.
As a result of the inquiries that we completed, at a very early stage we've been able to identify and arrest an individual. That 18-year-old man is currently in custody at Luton Police Station.
Some neighbours were too afraid to leave their flats yesterday, not knowing what was going on and whether they were safe.
I woke up to my boys screaming in the morning and looking out the window, there's the police everywhere with guns, my boys are screaming. Nothing, like, couldn't imagine waking up to it.
Yeah, it's scary. It's not nice knowing that something's happened this serious and we don't know what's happened.
About 5:30 in the morning I heard the shouting and the police sirens, yeah. But from what I have heard, it is very gut-wrenching to hear something like that on your doorstep, definitely. Not nice at all. Very sad.
This is a nightmare because I'm a single mom. I have my coffee every morning in the balcony and I saw all the police cars and everything, and the nursery called me telling me that the nursery is going to be closed today, so I couldn't drop him off either.
Bedfordshire Police want to reassure residents that this was an isolated incident and there's no threat to the wider community. The victims have not yet been named. Vincent McAviney, BBC News.
One of England's largest school academy trusts wants to ban mobile phones for students during the day. The Ormiston Academies Trust says it's starting phasing out access to smartphones for its 35,000 students because of what it calls the catastrophic impact of on children's mental health and learning. Some parents in Shropshire in the West Midlands are concerned smartphones could be bad for their children's development, so they've decided to test out phones that have no access to the internet. Our reporter Joanne Riddle has been to meet them.
In the 80s, yuppies posed with huge mobile phones, but no one was glued to screens. In fact, their phones didn't even have screens. They were purely for making calls. Imagine that. Fast forward to today, and 10-year-old twins Imogen and Toby and their pals are going retro. They have feature phones, which are basically a smaller version of the old brick phone with no access to the internet.
We can call and text loads and it's really good. There are games and you can call and you can text, but there isn't any internet.
At first, I genuinely didn't want one because I thought everyone's going to make fun of me. Everyone's gonna think I'm just weird for having one.
At first I was a bit really angry at Mum, but now I'm really like it, as now basically all my friends have one. When I found out that my friends got one, that made me happy because I knew I said to my mum, oh, can I have one? And she was like, sure. So yeah.
So instead of scrolling through social media, they spend more time playing at home in Shrewsbury. Their parents are part of a growing movement called Smartphone-Free Childhood.
This movement is not about judging parents who've made decisions in the past when they didn't have enough information available to them.
Harry has a feature phone and it's worth about £50 rather than an iPhone which is £600 or £700.
The group wants parents to sign a pact not to buy their children smartphones until they're 14. There are more than 120,000 members across the country.
You don't want them to be bullied for not having a smartphone, but at the same time, you don't want to expose them to all of the risks that come with smartphones. It's the exposure to harmful content. It's the addictive element of smartphones.
The children here are happy with their internet-free phones, but Tess admits their reaction wasn't great initially.
Because nobody else had a feature phone at that time, and it was, Mum, it's not fair.
Her hope is that simpler phones will become a social norm for children under 14. Joanne Riddle, BBC News.
I speak to Tom Bennett, Behaviour Advisor for the Department of Education. Tom, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. What's your view on the compatibility of getting kids to learn and them having access to smartphones at school?
Oh, there's no question about it. Children should be kept as far away from possible as smartphones from an educational context. From a safeguarding point of view, of course, phones can expose children to all the kinds of horrors we're trying to keep them safe from. But from a teaching and learning point of view, I think what's crucial is that we understand that when you're at school, we're trying to get kids to focus and think hard for long extended periods of time. It's not always fun, but we make it as fun as possible. But when it comes to smartphones, they're designed to focus on trivia, on high pace, changing attention and so on. They're designed to be attention hoovers, and they're designed to hoover the real estate of a child's mind, normally in order to sell at things. So the idea that smartphones can somehow be a significant asset to the school environment is just crazy. I mean, there are some uses for phones in schools, but they're massively outweighed by the detrimental effects. And the wisest schools are now wising up to this and banning phones across the estate.
How likely is it you'd have a revolt on your hands, though, at the suggestion of doing so in some places?
Well, that's only because, I mean, I don't think there'd be an actual revolt, because I've seen, hundreds and hundreds of schools do this, and they've all reported how happy they are that they've done it. And bizarrely enough, the children are delighted after a while because they're free from that constant pernicious influence in their lives and the needs to be online constantly. Parents love it. And teachers in schools report that this is the best thing they've ever done. It takes a little bit of effort and willpower at the beginning to really nail this. But the biggest obstacle is the mindset of people who think, oh no, kids just must be on their phones. That's the biggest problem. No, they mustn't. And that's something that's been sold to us by people trying to sell us technology and apps.
How much of a say does the Department of Education have?
Well, the Department of Education released guidelines last year, which I think were pretty solid, which is to say that schools should restrict access to phones. And the decision, I think, was made at the time to allow head teachers the autonomy to figure out how to do that for themselves, which is why it wasn't made statutory at the time. I think there's a really good argument for the ministry to go even further and to make it statutory, make it a requirement that schools restrict access to phones, as many other countries have done, like the Netherlands, like parts of Australia, and like France. So I think probably we could go further.
What is ultimately the outcome then by doing this? I mean, do results improve?
Yeah, well, what you find is that children's attention span goes back to what they're supposed to be learning and thinking about, which inevitably has a huge impact in their learning. And the evidence suggests very strongly that it's the least advantaged children that suffer the most from access to mobile phones, because they're the ones that need the school environment to be supportive and scaffold their thinking and learning the most. So oddly enough, this is an article of social justice, let alone anything else. And also, as a byproduct, if you can call it that, children socialise more with each other face to face, and schools are crucial environments in which children learn social skills through which they can navigate their own lives and their life beyond school. So, as I say, it's a no-brainer. Bin the phones.
Tom Bennett, Advisor to the Department of Education, thank you very much. Hopefully you have your flags and bunting ready, because it's almost over. The festival that aims to bring the best classical music to the widest possible audience ends tonight with the last night of the BBC Proms. Along with all the traditional second half favourites, the programme features works by Puccini and Fauré, as well as Henry Mancini's famous theme for the Pink Panther. What's billed as the world's biggest music party also includes a performance by one of the UK's best-loved pianists, Sir Stephen Hough, who performs Saint-Saëns Piano Concerto No. 5. Let's speak to Sir Nicholas Kenyon, Nick Kenyon as he prefers, who was director of BBC Proms from 1996 to 2007. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. How much do you enjoy it now as a viewer or a participant rather than a director?
I enjoy it very much indeed, because the Proms has always had this capacity to reinvent itself. The Proms is now doing a wider range of music than it was when I and my team were directing it, and I think that's a wonderful demonstration of the way in which classical music is coming out of its box, incorporating so many other things. You know, you mentioned Henry Mancini. There was a whole Prom devoted to him, Nick Drake. I think that the range of music that comes into the Proms is tremendous, and it is underpinned by the classical repertory. We've had magnificent performances from international orchestras, the Berlin Philharmonic, the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, and our own forces. The BBC Symphony Orchestra gave a marvellous tribute to Andrew Davis, who was chief conductor through many of my years there. And I think the Proms has got a vitality and a sense of community which is all too rare these days, and it brings people together in, as we will see tonight, an enormous celebration.
How has that evolution come about then? Would people who haven't been for many years notice a great difference if they went again?
I think it is evolutionary. That's always been the thing about the Proms, and it's depended on the conductors, the creative figures who were leading it. When the great Malcolm Sargent was conductor of the Proms in the 1950s, it was a very core classical repertory of Brahms and Beethoven and the big choral works, and it's gradually expanded, particularly through international orchestras wanting to come here and wanting to experience the extraordinary atmosphere of the Albert Hall. Because remember, you're not sitting in a normal hall or theatre in serried ranks looking at a stage. You're one great circle, and that gives a marvellous sense of community to orchestras and performers and the audience together. So I think there is something unique about the atmosphere of the Proms, particularly, of course, the fact that the people who get the best places in the hall are paying the least. Those are the people standing in the arena just a few feet from the performers, and they're still paying, I think, only £8 to be there. So it's a tremendous undertaking.
I remember reading that the idea was that you could even lie down and listen if you really wanted to. Is that still permissible?
It's perfectly permissible, but interestingly, all the Proms I've been to this season have been absolutely packed, and there was certainly no room in the arena to lie down, though possibly up at the top gallery of the hall there is space to do that if you want. But I think what you do get in the Albert Hall during the Proms is this phenomenal sense of attention and phenomenal concentration on the music that is taking place, as well as everything you mentioned in the last night tonight. There will be 2 new works, completely new to the Proms and to audiences, and that's been true through the season, and you can guarantee that those new works get listened to with the same open ears and the same attention as the great heartland of the classical repertory.
It's lovely to hear your enthusiasm for it. Nick Kenyon, former director of the BBC Proms, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, all Proms are available on BBC Sounds until mid-October. And if you want to watch 24 of the previous Proms programmes, you can do so on the BBC iPlayer. It's Fashion Week here in London, and although the front row of a runway show couldn't be further from the front lines of Ukraine, several Ukrainian designers debuted their new collections in a special show, with a war veteran striding the catwalk. Emma McCarthy was there.
London Fashion Week is well underway, and we're here at the UA in UK Fashion Show, and it's all about celebrating and showcasing Ukrainian designers. There's 4 Ukrainian designers that are showcasing their collections, and we spoke to a few people involved about what it takes to get a show like this off the ground.
Sometimes it's very challenging, very creative, very passionate, and definitely it's my favorite brands. Yes, I love different brands around of the world, but in my heart, I'm very big patriot of our Ukrainian brands. That's why I can say that it's one of the best brands of the world. And all of them trying to do their best, and they make very good mix.
So the messages that by my presents, I want to show people that war is still going on, and it's really terrible what things are there in the country, and it has its impact on the fashion industry, on everything. And the second message is that I want to translate to people that still people who had injuries like me can participate in fashion shows, still can be passing these messages to people. And we want to tell the world that we're hoping that the war is going to end soon, and we want to tell people that it's not over, and don't forget that.
Ukrainian fashion and creativity all on display, but as well a message of hope here at London Fashion Week.
Emma McCarthy. Let's take a look at the weather forecast now with Sarah. I'm sorry, that's later. First of all, I'm going to remind you of our top story this hour, though, because there's plenty on the BBC website about it. It's the UK Prime Minister's talks with Joe Biden in Washington having come to an end. Well, Sir Keir Starmer said talks had been wide-ranging and productive, but didn't signal any decision on allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles to hit targets inside Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly called on Kiev's Western allies to authorise their use, with President Putin warning that such a decision would represent NATO's direct participation in the Ukraine war. Now it is time for the weather.
Hello. Today certainly dawned on quite a chilly note across some southern areas. We had temperatures down in the low to mid single figures, but gradually through the course of the weekend, we're going to be seeing those temperatures on the rise. So it'll turn a little bit warmer. Still some rain across some northern areas, particularly so for Northern Ireland and Scotland today. Down to the fact that we've got low pressure sitting out towards the northwest. That will push this cold front gradually further east, but high pressure holds on further south. So plenty of dry, sunny weather for central and southern England, much of Wales too. That cloud that we had this morning tending to break up into the afternoon. Eastern Scotland holding on to some dry weather into the afternoon, but this band of rain will arrive across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. The winds are going to pick up here too. And we're going to see temperatures generally the mid to high teens in the north, could be 19, 20 degrees down towards the south and east. Into the evening hours then, still dry towards the south. We've got this band of cloud and patchy light rain clearing out of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but that's going to be slow moving across Northern England and North Wales to start the day. Most of us reasonably mild, still a little bit chilly overnight in the south. We're getting down into single figures again, but not quite as cold as it's been over the past few nights here. So Sunday's weather then, band of cloud and slow moving on and off patchy rain across Northern England, North Wales at times too. Either side of that, things are looking drier and brighter. There'll be a rash of showers just drifting gradually eastwards across Scotland, but they should clear away fairly quickly. So an improved day compared to today, more sunshine here. And in the sunshine down towards East Anglia and the southeast, 20 or 21 degrees. But for most of us, I think we'll be in the high teens. Now heading on into the new working week, and high pressure very much going to be dominating our weather right across the British Isles. So Monday, not much weather on the map, as you can see. We will have a little bit of mist, cloud and low fog here and there, but that should gradually lift and clear away. So some long spells of blue sky, lighter winds than there has been as well. So it's going to feel really pleasant. 20, 21 degrees in the south. Further north, we're still looking at the mid to high teens on Monday, but those temperatures will increase into the middle of the week as weather fronts are kept at bay, and we're going to be seeing the The wind's increasingly coming in from an easterly direction, bringing us these orange colours you can see, this milder air mass, especially for central and southern areas. So looking ahead then, we're going to see temperatures in the south up to possibly the mid-20s through the middle part of the week. Typically the high teens, low 20s further north. But for all of us, a largely dry, settled spell of weather with some sunshine on the cards. Bye for now.
The future is already here.
Lights, camera, action.
All about AI changing our jobs.
Where do you see this technology moving in the future?
A flipping burger robot.
From gadgets to gaming.
The virtual reality landscape has changed quite a bit.
May the best driver win. It won't be me.
Sustainability to AI.
By using giant nets and AI robots to deal with plastic pollution.
This is where the technology is being tested.
Fake.
Yay! I'm enjoying. Do you enjoy this?
Yeah, this is good.
The latest developments from the world of tech.
I could come up with a date predicting when you would die.
Pat your head, rub your stomach.
This is actually a floating solar farm, and it's a pretty impressive sight.
I think it's quite cool.
Wow! That went right through me!
Click. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The funeral for Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei begins in Uganda. She was killed after being set on fire by a former boyfriend. US and UK leaders make no public change to their policy of blocking Ukraine's use of long-range Western missiles against Russia. Two NASA astronauts on the International Space Station insist they don't feel let down by Boeing, despite being stranded there by problems with the company's spacecraft. Hello and welcome, I'm Martine Croxall. The funeral for the Ugandan Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei, who was killed by a former boyfriend this month, has begun in eastern Uganda. The service is taking place at her family's hometown of Bukwo. She will receive full military honours, having been a member of the Ugandan Armed Forces. The 33-year-old marathon runner, who competed in the Paris Games last month, died after being doused with petrol and set alight. Her body was brought overnight from Kenya, where she lived and trained. Her death has renewed concern about the level of violence against women in Kenya and the region. Her former partner has since died of his injuries. Well, let's show you the live pictures then coming from Rebecca's hometown of Bukwo, close to the Kenyan border but in Uganda. Last night on Friday, family members, friends and activists against gender-based violence viewed Rebecca's coffin at a funeral home in the Kenyan town of Eldoret before her body was brought back to her hometown. Well, we heard that her mother, Agnes Cheptegei, was wearing a souvenir bag at the time that the athlete had received at the Paris Olympics, where she'd competed in the marathon. Well, Patience Akumu is a Ugandan lawyer who's campaigned on gender equality issues, and she told us what lessons need to be learned from Rebecca's violent death.
I think that in this moment of deep sorrow, mourning, we need to reflect about the ways in which women, no matter their social status, no matter what they've achieved in life, are still expected to bow to the expectations of society, even if it kills them. Domestic violence is still a reality for many women in Africa, in Eastern Africa. The statistics tell us that at least 42% of women suffer some kind of violence in their lifetime. But this is perhaps an understatement, because as an African woman, every day on the roads, in school, you're sexualized, you're hustled. There are laws. There is systematic discrimination against women, systematic control of women's bodies, where there are laws that have been passed in public places forbidding